Welcome to Road Pounders Garage. If you saw my last video, you saw how I converted my Harbor Freight motorcycle table lift from the hydraulic jack that it had on it to a hydraulic cylinder powered by an electric motor. Worked out pretty well, so I went ahead and did my second lift the same way. Both of these lifts are the older Central Hydraulics lifts, which is the predecessor to the Pittsburgh lift that Harbor Freight sells now, but all the principles are pretty much the same. There are a few differences between these lifts, and I'll point those out as we go. I'm going into a bit more detail on what I did and how I did it on this lift, but I've got them both up and running now, and it's working out pretty well for me. So watch the video and let me know what you think. This is the valve and switch assembly that I'm going to be using to switch the power between the two lifts. The valve, when the lever is switched one way, the hydraulic fluid will come in here, go out here to one lift, swing the lever the other way, fluid will come out here going to the other lift. The switch assembly is actually two switches, one normally open, one normally closed. There's normally open, normally closed. So right now, when the button is released, one of those switches in the on position, the other is in the off position. Press the button, it transposes. The one that was off is now on, the one that is on is now off. I'm going to mount the switch assembly back here behind the valve, and this finger is going to come up and press the button when the lever is swung over to the right, correction, left, for the left lift. When I swing the lever the other way, it'll release the button and power the right lift. The bracket here is one that I got when I bought my digital readout for my lathe, and I got 6 brackets. I only used one, so I'm going to be drilling and drilling it. The back of the valve, I had to drill these 4 holes. I drilled them and tapped them. I'm going to put corresponding holes in the bracket and just bolt the valve to the bracket. Then it'll be bolted to the mount for the pump unit. Okay, here's what it looks like all mounted up. As you can see, I've got the lever over to the right. The button is released. That means that the electrics and the hydraulics are both on the right hand lift. Swing the lever over, it switches the hydraulics over to the left hand lift and presses the button switching the electrics over to the left hand lift. If you remember from my last video, I had to make a collar to go inside this cup so that the rod from the cylinder would fit inside and the collar would take up the extra space. But on this lift, the cup is a lot smaller and the rod from the original jack is about the same size as the rod in the cylinder. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to make a collar to go around this and then neck it down to where it'll fit inside the cup. So the collar will be quite a bit longer than the other one, but I should be able to compensate for that with the placement of the cross member. When I did the first lift, this rod on the other jack was considerably larger, as was the cup that the rod went into. I had to neck it down so it would fit onto the rod of the hydraulic cylinder, so I made a collar that would match the inside diameter of the cup, and I could thread the inside of it to thread onto the end of the rod. I couldn't do that with this one because of the smaller rod and cup on this jack, so I made this adapter which will fit into here. Then I'll thread the hole on the inside and the rod on the cylinder will thread into the adapter. When I first made the adapter, I had my machine set up incorrectly And what happened was, the deeper I cut the threads, the more thread I was cutting away. So what I did was I bored the hole out considerably larger, made an insert to go in there, bored that to the proper size to cut the threads. Now I'm going to cut the threads on the inside of this insert, which will allow me to use this adapter that I made. Here I've cut the cross member to length so it'll fit snugly between the side rails of the frame, and it's made out of 3-inch square tubing as opposed to the 4-inch that I used on the other lift, so I'll be able to center it between the side rails of the frame without having the problem of it sticking up above the side rails of the frame and holding the lift table up higher than it should be. I've beveled the edges here all the way around so it'll give me a good fillet to fill in with weld as I weld it in, and I've cut up the stock to make the post, and we'll get that all welded together. Here I've got the stock set up in the chop saw to cut off the length. This is the 5/16 by 2-inch stock. I'm going to be cutting 3 pieces of this, and they'll be sandwiched together to make one piece 15/16 of an inch wide by 2 inches, and that will serve as the post that will be welded to the cross member on the lift when I weld that all together. Okay, I've got the 3 pieces cut, and I've cleaned them up with the angle grinder just to get all the old paint and rust off of them. And what's going to happen is I'm going to put these 3 together, sandwich them, and run a bead along the edges here to weld these 3 pieces together into one. Once they're one piece, I will drill a hole, and that'll be for the clevis pin. The other end will be welded to the cross member, and that will serve as my post to mount the hydraulic cylinder. Okay, here I've got the piece mounted in the vise. I'm going to grind a chamfer along this edge. Then on this piece, chamfer here, and then a chamfer here on this piece. That way, when all 3 are sandwiched together, there'll be a nice groove in here, a nice channel to lay my weld. Okay, I've got the 3 pieces welded together all into one big piece. Next is to drill a hole through here for the clevis pin, and then it'll be ready to mount onto the cross member. Here you can see I've welded the 3 pieces together to make the post, and I drilled the hole for the clevis pin. On the last one, the clevis pin was 1 inch in diameter, so naturally I took a 1-inch drill, drilled the 1-inch hole in it, but I was running the drill a little faster than I should have, and it chattered, and the hole didn't come out perfectly round, and I couldn't get the clevis pin in. I wound up putting the clevis pin in the lathe and just shaving just a couple thousandths off of it so I could get it to fit through the hole in the post. This time what I did is I drilled it out to 7/8 inches, and then with my boring head I bored it the last 1/8 of an inch to get it to 1 inch so the clevis pin would fit and the hole would be round. The next step is to weld the post onto the cross member, and then it'll be ready to go into the frame. Okay, I've got the post welded onto the cross member. The cross member is ready to go into place. It'll go down between the frame rails on either side and get welded into place. Clevis pin will go through here to hold the cylinder in place, All I'm waiting for is the internal threading tool so I can cut the threads inside the adapter that I showed you before for the end of the rod on the cylinder. Here we're at the lower end of the front left lift arm. We have this gap here, and it had a corresponding gap on the other side, which would allow the lift arm assembly to move side to side a significant amount. And what that did on the other lift is it was able to move far enough that it almost walked off of the stop switch. If it would have done that, I would have been able to overextend it and possibly do some damage to the lift. I caught it in time on the other lift, and I put spacers in here. I machined up some spacers, one to go on each side to keep the front lift arm assembly centered so it can't walk off of the stop switch. Okay, this project seems to be coming along reasonably well. I was able to weld the three pieces together to make the post, get it welded to the cross member. This time, as opposed to the other lift, I had the presence of mind to mount it flush with the frame so when the table comes down it won't rock forward. Got it all welded in and got the cylinder mounted. The long-awaited left-handed boring bar finally came, so I was able to cut the threads on the inside of the adapter to thread onto the rod of the cylinder, and I got the cylinder mounted, and everything seems to be coming together rather nicely. Yesterday I spent the better part of the day sorting out the electrics so that the electrics would be independent between the two lifts. When I switch the hydraulics from one lift to the other, I'll also be switching the electrics. I installed a go switch on the right side, stop switch on the right side, and another go switch on the left side. This lift has two go switches on it, and it has the green button on the lift unit that will allow me to raise the lift from either side of the lift or from the pump unit itself. The reason for that is the first lift that I did sits between the pump unit and this lift here, so instead of having to walk all the way around to use the switch on the pump unit, I can lift it from either side with pedal switches, or if I happen to be over there, I can raise it with the button switch on the pump unit. When I put the pedal switch on the previous lift, I bent the end of it out to make a little bit of a pedal to step on, but that created a bit of a problem because when I was loading a bike, if I wasn't very careful, I'd kick the pedal switch, and that can get rather interesting when you're trying to load a 900-pound Goldwing onto the lift and all of a sudden the lift goes up unexpectedly. So I left the bent portion out, and this pedal switch hangs down kind of inside and it's harder to get at. Plus, instead of mounting it behind the cross member, I mounted it up as far forward as was practical, again so it minimizes the chance of inadvertently kicking it. Here's the valve assembly for switching the hydraulics between the two lifts. This switch here will differentiate between the two lifts for the electrics. When I switch from the right lift over to the left lift, this finger pushes the button, changing the electrics from one lift to the other. Then it goes down to this switch, which will operate either lift depending on which lift is selected by this switch. then all the pedal switches will also be live, as are the stop switches. Got the one wire going to one left, the other wire going to the other left. This I made out of an old extension cord, a 3-wire 16-gauge extension cord. I needed 3 wires going to each left, so that worked out just fine. I went to the hardware store to buy some of this in bulk, and they wanted like $1 a foot for it. I needed 25 feet, so that'd be $25, and I could buy 2 extension cords for that price. So I bought 1 extension cord, used one of my old ones for the wiring for the lifts, and still had a little bit left over. I've got all the plumbing sorted out, and I've got the electrics hooked up. And the way I've got it set up, I've got this lever here. When it's over to the right, the hydraulics and the electrics are both on the right hand lift. Pull it over to the left, and this switch switches the electrics over to the right hand lift, and the valve switches the hydraulics over to the left hand lift. Both of the lifts are operated by either pedal switch or the green button on the pump unit. So I can go over here to this lift, hit the pedal switch, or I can hit the pedal switch on this one when I switch the lever over to that one. I hit the pedal switch and nothing happened. There we go. The electrics and the hydraulics are both now on the left-hand lift. The problem that I have now is that if I hit the pedal switch on the right hand lift, the left hand lift goes up. And additionally, not only are the 2 pedal switches disabled, the stop switch is also disabled. What I intend to do to correct this problem is this switch here is actually 2 switches, one normally open, one normally closed. When the lever is over to the right hand left, the normally closed switch activates the switches on the right hand lift. When I swing the lever over, it pushes the button. Now it activates the switches on the left hand lift. What I intend to do is remove the normally closed switch, mount another normally open switch here, and make a double finger here, so when the lever is over to one lift, it activates that lift. In the transition, both switches are deactivated until it gets all the way over to the other side, then activates the other switch. That should rectify the problem that I've got with the wrong lift going up now. The long-awaited switch finally arrived, so I removed the normally closed switch off of this button, added the other button with a normally open switch, so that way when the hydraulics are switched all the way over to the left-hand lift, the left-hand button is depressed, sending the electrics over to the left-hand lift. When I go through the transition, that button's released. Both of the electrics on both lifts are deactivated until I get all the way to the right, and this finger pushes this button, energizing the electrics on the right-hand lift. That way I don't have the problem of being able to have the electrics live on one lift while the hydraulics are live on the other. Also, I had a problem with the finger after several uses would pivot on me and not press this button all the way and wouldn't allow the electrics on the left hand lift to operate. So I drilled a hole through here all the way through the spacer, and then I drilled a tap hole into the handle. Just ran a bolt all the way down to tighten it to keep the finger assembly from pivoting, so it stays in adjustment the way it should be. So that's how this project panned out. I'm pretty happy with the way it worked out. We had a few minor bugs that showed their ugly heads, and we managed to whack-a-mole them back down, and everything's working the way it should and the way I intended it to. So for now, I think everything's going to be working okay. These creaky old bones of mine are starting to have a bit of a hard time getting some of the heavier baggers and gold rings up onto the lift though. So my next project is going to be installing a winch on the front of one of the lifts so I can get the heavier bikes back up and I don't have to struggle with them. And I've always considered motoring them up under their own power to be a little bit sketchy, because just one little slip with the clutch or the throttle and next thing I know I've got a gold ring on top of my bench instead of on my lift. So I'm going to go with the winch and slow things down a little bit and get them up on there with a little help from the muscle of the winch.